They say that you should never judge a book by its cover, that you should always give things a proper chance before deciding whether or not you enjoy it or want to dedicate your time to it. But you know what? That's a load of dick and balls. You absolutely should judge a book by its cover, because if a book has a shit cover, then you probably don't want to fucking read it. And that's exactly the same for video games, which is why video game introductions are so important, more important than many people tend to give them credit for. First impressions really are everything, especially in this age of instant gratification and brain rot that we live in. However, what sets video games apart from other forms of media is their interactivity. It may not only just be an introduction to a story, it could also be an introduction to how a game works, how it feels to play, or simply how long you have to wait to dig into the action. So today we're going to have a look at how games should properly introduce us to their stories and worlds, and to top it off, we'll go through some examples of games that do their introductions well, and more importantly, games that do them laughably wrong. Now, if there's one thing I cannot stand, it is being fucked around. I hate it when I just want to get to the good part and some asshole talks my ear off or delays me with crap that I just don't care about. And that's why today's video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. There isn't anything more infuriating than a video game that insists upon making you sit through a bunch of inane dialogue or unnecessary hand-holding before it lets you actually have fun. This is obviously a bigger concern for games that aren't narrative driven. Of course you need to have some dialogue or cutscenes to lay the groundwork, but you also need to remember that video games are an interactive medium that require, interaction. And yet there are still plenty of examples of games that are not as heavily narrative oriented in a more sandbox or open world that are far too interested in trying to show off the lore or wasting your time with restrictive tutorials rather than giving players the agency to learn for themselves. Not only is it frustrating to be kept from actually being able to be in control, but a lengthy fuck around is detrimental to a game's replayability. I can think of a few games that I think about playing every now and again, but get disheartened by how long it takes to actually get to the good part again. I'm not trying to say that tutorials or intro sequences have no place in video games, but there are more games that have far too tedious of an introduction than those that don't give you one that's long enough. And it may seem counterintuitive, but often that lack of an introduction is part of the charm. Less is more. If you want people to experience your story, you need to be able to get them interested from the very start. But what sets video games apart from books or films is, once again, their interactivity. You need to be a little smarter about how you set the scene rather than just throwing lines of exposition at players. Visual and environmental storytelling in particular are such powerful tools for video games because of their immersive nature. Being able to tell a story through exploring and interacting with the game's world is not only more powerful, but it's satisfying for players. By finding it yourself, it feels like an achievement, and since environmental storytelling happens while being in control, the player doesn't feel like they're being kept away from actually playing the game. Games also have the virtue of being able to set an atmosphere through the core gameplay itself. If a game has fast-paced and unforgiving mechanics, then it's going to feel more thrilling and cutthroat, and if it's more slow and forgiving, it'll be more relaxed and chilled out. This is, again, not to say that dialogue has no place in video games. Of course it does. It lets you introduce characters to players, but it also doesn't need to happen en masse right at the start of the game. You can't just introduce people in the first 30 minutes and expect us to immediately understand who they are, give us a reason to like them, or have their character actually develop. And the same goes for the story itself. Don't try to explain everything in a rushed or half-assed way at the start of the game, or make people sit through hours of bullshit just so they know why it's okay they're murdering loads of people or whatever. Let them discover it more naturally as they play the game and make up their own minds. Now, I get it. You want to use your flashiest animations and cutscenes in the intro of your game because you want to wow players to draw them in and keep them interested. And of course, it makes sense to have cutscenes featured more heavily at the start of the game or when there's more dialogue to be shared. What a lot of games struggle with, however, is consistency. One area in particular is the lapse in quality between the pre-rendered animations to the automated in-engine dialogue scenes. RPGs are the worst offending genre, and I understand that it's not feasible for every single cutscene or dialogue piece to be hand animated, but if there's a sharp drop off in quality, it's jarring. Now Todd, I know you're a big fan of the channel, so I gotta say that a game that is very consistent with the quality of its dialogue is Skyrim. I'm not saying it doesn't look like arse, but it's consistent. The opening certainly isn't absolute cinema or anything, but setting the bar relatively low means that the rest of the dialogue isn't of noticeably lesser quality to the point of detriment. But gameplay is no different. Yes, you'll want your introduction to be exciting, but if there's a severe drop off in quality or fun immediately after, then it sucks. Much like with a narrative, you don't want to show your hand right off the bat, especially if you then plan on shuffling it right back into the deck for a much shittier one. It's a tricky tightrope to have to walk, but whether it's gameplay mechanics, music, the storyline, or just about any other possible facet of a video game, you need to ensure that the technical quality is consistent throughout, even if you do throw all your big guns at the start. Otherwise, motivation to keep playing begins to wear thin. Hey, Vsauce, Davo here. Now, not every video game has cutscenes or a linear story for you to follow along with, but you still need a tutorial to learn how to play it. Or do you? Personally, I think that the best way to learn in life is to do, and the same goes for video games. Like I said earlier, I hate being fucked around. I much prefer just being thrown into the deep end rather than being forced to sit through some dipshit baby mode level or boring ass dialogue. And just because a game starts you straight off into the action doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be smart about how it teaches you to play. What games with the best gameplay introductions do is not teach the player how to play per se, but rather let the player teach themselves. And I'm not talking about plastering the environment in fucking yellow paint, I'm talking about introducing a mechanic and then slowly building upon that in an intuitive way as the game becomes more complex, which is infinitely more satisfying than games that pause the action to explain how everything works as soon as it comes up. And that being said, plenty of games are a little too complex for you to just jump straight into and know what the hell's going on, and that's alright too. There is certainly some merit in having a tutorial stage, as long as it doesn't hold your hand too much. But you need to find the right balance between flat out telling your player how to do everything and letting them go out and explore and figure it out on their own. Being told what to do doesn't give you the same sense of accomplishment and satisfaction as figuring it out for yourself. Okay, enough of the ins and outs, it's time for the good part. The part where we talk about the games that are good and the games that are bad. Of course, since I am the Jesus of gamers, everything I have listed here is objectively correct, and if you don't agree with me, you can lick my nutsack. Alright, I'll stop being a hypocrite and fucking you around. So let's also start the list with a game that is the antithesis of fuck around factor. Noita. There's no long-winded tutorial, no constant pop-ups, and no little bitch-ass tutorial dungeon to complete. And despite throwing you straight into the deep end, Noita still effectively teaches you how to play with visual cues and set pieces, and mechanics that slowly build upon themselves in a satisfying progression curve. A lack of fuck around is crucial for a roguelike, because you're meant to be jumping into it over and over again, but even from the first time that you play, you open the game, press start, bam, you're in the game. Noita is everything that a roguelike should aim to be. Side note, I hope you're happy that I pronounced it right this time instead of saying Noita, you Finnish fucks, but yeah, this game is very good. S tier intro. Now look, I know that Legends Arceus is by far the best thing that Game Freak and the Pokémon Company have shat out in ages by virtue of not just being the exact same game that they've been serving up for the last 2.5 decades, but by God does this game fuck you around. The open world roaming in this game is actually fun and surprisingly refreshing for the franchise, but the game is far too interested in preventing you from getting to that part with inane dialogue and tutorials for things that a brain-dead chimp could figure out rather than letting you just enjoy the game. The handholdiness does not fade away later in the game either, and I know that it's certainly not the worst or most tedious introduction out of all the more recent Pokemon games, but the reason this one hurts more is because of the potential this game had to actually be good, and is yet only even somewhat mediocre because it's associated with Pokemon. S for shit tier introduction. Half-Life 2 is one of the best examples of setting an atmosphere right from the very start. From the unsettling encounter with the G-Man to your introduction to the oppressive, dystopic world of City 17, you're immediately shown things aren't right and the world has gone to shit, even though you don't know the half of what actually happened. Yes, you get caught in a few unskippable cutscenes, but the game effectively shows you its mechanics and the set pieces are absorbing, and while the physics engine isn't as impressive as it was back in the day, the game has certainly aged better than the original game has in some regards. Gotta quickly talk shit, because yes, the resonance cascade and stumbling into the aftermath is incredibly atmospheric, especially for a game from 1997, but that railcar intro goes on for too damn long. Fucking G-Man, should have put more budget into the facial animations, you silly bitch. Yes, Half-Life 1 is goated in many other ways and is arguably better than its sequel is in many other facets, but in terms of the introduction, I'd say that Half-Life 2 does it better. S for Sigma tier. Todd, I'm sorry, but Fallout 4's intro is kinda dog water. I think it generally does an okay job of creating an unsettling atmosphere, and I really like the guy reading the news on TV as shit starts to hit the fan, but this game's biggest problem is Sean. Spoiler warning, but also you've had like 10 years to play this game, so lick my ass. You can't have a character be known to the player for like 3 minutes, also a fucking baby who has no personality or dialogue and no reason to like the character, and then have the entire narrative be motivated by trying to find and rescue them. Maybe I'm evil because I don't care about this ugly ass little baby, and to that I say yes, I am worse than Hitler. I also don't care for Fallout 4's intro ruining its supposed sandbox gameplay for me either. Fuck you, Todd, do better. S for sucks ass tier. Atmospherically, Darkest Dungeon is one of the best games out there, but it also has a banger of an introduction too. It doesn't throw you into the deep end quite as abruptly as Noita does, but it is still clever at introducing new mechanics and features, both in the dungeons themselves as you delve further into the abyss, as well as your town as you unlock more features and buildings. There's a huge roster of heroes to use, and learning as you play is not only satisfying, but part of the game's core, both what team compositions work and learning from your failures when they go south or you get a little too confident. And although the game can be a son of bastard, a bitch, it's an effective way of teaching you to do better next time. The intro movie's great as well. It's vague enough with its premise, but enticing enough for you to delve further into the lore, and at no point does the game bombard you with codices and dialogue, but rather slowly explores the world with you as you progress, and with Wayne June's goated narration, it is infinitely better. S for sure is a good introduction tier. Now, Kingdom Come Deliverance's intro isn't necessarily bad, it's what comes after that kills it for me. The way it goes from these beautiful handmade animations and scenes to these disturbing, lifeless, robotic dialogue cutscenes, it's so fucking jarring. Again, I know that a lot of RPGs are similar, but the drop off in quality in this game often feels like a free fall off a cliff, and once you settle into the actual narrative, it feels like they kinda used up all of the good material right at the start of the game. I'll be honest, this game is kinda cool and also kinda arse in many other aspects, but the juxtaposition between its good and bad set pieces is a real mood killer and sets the game up for a lot of disappointing moments. S for sure seems like they forgot how to animate Henry's face properly tier. Now look, there are plenty more games that could have easily made their way into the list of games with shitty introductions, but standing above all else is one game that is so bad it physically hurts. Assassin's Creed Black Flag. If you haven't played Assassin's Creed Blacklisted from my Steam library before, then I envy you greatly because this is the most insufferable start to a video game ever made. First off, Ubisoft launcher. Already off to the worst start possible. It starts off with this cool navy battle and it's actually kind of fun, and then boom, trailing mission with auto parkour, and then you get to sail a boat again and you're thinking, okay, maybe this is alright, and then it pulls you out of it into the most boring fucking cutscene imaginable about how this is actually your job, and then you finally get back in and it's more trailing missions, and I just wanted to be a pirate. Don't fucking edge me like this. Look, Ass Creed is probably the most overrated franchise of all time, but Black Flag is a masterclass in how long you can fuck people around for before actually letting them get to the just as mind-numbingly boring trailing missions that come after that. This isn't just S for shit tier, this is S for Shadow Realm tier. Like I said at the start of the video, introductions are important. Not only do they determine how much you'll enjoy the start of a game, but also how much you'll enjoy the rest of it, or whether you even bother sticking with it. Really, I guess what I'm trying to say with this video is don't overdo your intro. Don't spend all of your effort trying to make a huge spectacle or force players into listening what you have to say. Let the gameplay do the talking for you, because like with many things in life, when it comes to an intro, less is more. And for players, don't fall for the sunk cost fallacy. If the game you're playing sucks ass, don't wait for it to get good, because unless you're a pseudo-intellectual to post shitty game reviews on YouTube, you don't actually have to play the whole game. Plus, the earlier you give up, the easier it is to get a refund for it through Steam. And if you stuck with this video until this point, then hopefully that means I did something right with its intro too. Or you're just a brain-dead monkey. Either way, hit the like and make sure to subscribe so I can keep making more of these shitty videos for you to consume on a semi-regular basis. And just remember that while sometimes you might strike a diamond if you keep digging, sometimes a shitty intro is just the precursor to a game that's just as shitty underneath.